Leah. Welcome to the Getting Married Multiculturally podcast. I'm super excited that you're here, and thank you so much for taking your time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we start, I want to tell the listeners a little bit that I found you on the Bridezilla Facebook group, the graduate group, where couples and mostly ladies, I think, connect and chat about what they should do after they get married. And they're sharing some really cool photos of their wedding day. Mm-hmm. So that's where I posted a question about if there's somebody who had a multicultural wedding, and you're one of them who responded to me. And you told me that you are from Jamaica and your husband is from America, and you guys got married in Canada. You still live there. So this all sounds really exciting and fun, and I can't wait to hear more about your wedding day.
Yeah.
But, okay, so before we get into that, can you tell a little bit the listeners about who you are, where you live, how did you get there, a little bit about who your husband is, and all of that good stuff?
Gotcha, sure. Okay, so I'm having this conversation with you from Toronto, Canada, which is where I live. I was born and raised in Canada, but my dad's from Jamaica, my mother's from Guyana. So I grew up in a Caribbean household in Canada. And my husband, Thomas, was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and his parents or his family are originally from Texas. We met when we were in Atlanta at undergrad. We both went to historically Black colleges and universities. So he went to Morehouse and I went to Spelman, and they are like right across the street from each other. So we met through mutual friends and have known each other since about 2001. But through social media, we reconnected and started a long-distance relationship in about 2014 or 2015. And then we dated long distance, with me going down there, and he was in Texas at the time, and him coming up here. And then he immigrated to Canada in 2017, and we got married in 2019.
Oh, wow. So you said you guys were in a long distance relationship. How was that for you? Was it hard?
Not too much. I think we're both introverts, and it just worked for us, So with his job and my job, we would schedule time in the evenings to chat with each other and catch up on each other's day. And because we knew each other, it wasn't weird. It was just catching up with old friends, right?
Yeah.
And so we did that for about a year and a half or so. And every 3 months or so, I would go to visit him or he would come to visit me. So during holidays, birthdays, we'd always plan the next trip. And then we decided that it was best for him. My parents are here in Toronto, and we just decided it was best for him to move up here. Unfortunately, his parents are deceased. They've passed away. So outside of one of his sisters who he's closest to, he didn't really have any ties down there, and he was comfortable making that move to here. So, yeah.
It's better to pick a place where there's more family and more relationships.
Yeah. And my brother has two children, and I'm actively involved in their upbringing. Aww. So it's been really great. We all live in the same neighborhood, so we can all help out, and that will be helpful for us when we start a family,
right?
Because they'll be able to help out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love that. So you said that you guys knew each other earlier.
Yeah, we met in 2001.
Yeah.
We had a mutual friend, and we were around campus together. At one point, I remember him walking me home in the evening because it was really late and dark outside, and we were just friends. There was no romantic. Just in about 2013, we reconnected on social media and started having longer conversations and started getting into, can I call you? And so it's been nice.
Yeah. I feel like when relationships grow from friendships, like marriages, that's probably because in the beginning, maybe you guys were not lined up with your life. And I feel like it's such a strong relationship if you can grow it into it when you reconnect and you say like, I'm in a good point of my life when I'm ready to get married, and I feel like this person is the right one for me.
Yeah, it really worked out well, and we're both in our late 30s,
Yeah.
and just, the timing of everything was supposed to happen as it should. So, yeah.
So maybe you mentioned this already, but how did you end up in Canada? Were you born there?
Yeah, I was born
Okay.
here in Toronto, Canada, and so
Okay.
my parents came they came to Canada from England, and they raised a family here. And so I was born and raised with Canadian values and, very North American upbringing, but also
Yeah.
still very in a Caribbean household. So food is a big deal for me, and it's a
Yeah.
big deal for Thomas as well. Um, certain dishes and certain, the culture and the traditions.
Yeah. Do you get to visit sometime to Caribbeans? Do you have any grandparents or family members?
My grandparents were here as well,
Uh-huh.
and some of my like I've got a lot of family in the States, so I find that with Caribbean families, and I guess it's with anybody who comes from elsewhere, the cultures and the traditions stay in the household, even if they're in America or even if they're in Canada. So my grandparents, all of my grandparents are deceased now, but the things that sort of they establish here. Keep going. And I think the same for Thomas as well. So it's Toronto is very multicultural,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about different backgrounds and different upbringings and cultures and traditions and neighborhoods. And although Canada and America are neighbors, and there are a lot of sort of structural similarities, I find that in Canada it's definitely very multicultural. Um, and so you have people, I find in America it's a little bit more black versus white. There's two groups and everyone else kind of aligns with one of those. But in Canada, there's black and there's Asian and there's white. And even within the black community, there's, the African Canadians
Mm-hmm.
and the Caribbean Canadians and whatnot. So my experience as a Caribbean Canadian is different than, my best friend's experience as an African Canadian. And different than Thomas's experience as a Black American.
Yeah.
His family is the oldest Black Catholic family in Texas. Um,
Wow.
right,
That's
so
incredible.
his great grandparents, his I think his father was a sharecropper. His great grandparents, were slaves. So his roots are in America, and although there are similarities, we definitely had to blend some of our cultures and
Yeah.
traditions. And then the added point is that we decided to get married in Victoria, BC, which is on the west coast.
Okay.
BC is British Columbia,
Okay.
and so it was a cross-country multicultural wedding. We stayed in Canada, but it was on the other end of the country.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Let me ask you a little bit about how did you guys get engaged before we start to talk about the wedding itself.
yeah.
So, you said that you guys knew each other for a long time. You were in a long distance relationship for a while. So, when was that point when you felt, or both of you felt that this is probably going to end up in the marriage, and or was it just surprise from him that he proposed, or you kind of talked about this together?
So I think because we're a bit older, we did things less conventional and traditional than many people who get married. So the idea was for him to come here, and so he moves here in 2017. And while he was here, we decided, what, let's go ahead and file that immigration paperwork. So we filed the immigration paperwork so we could fully work here and live here, and he's got his permanent resident status here. And just that planning process was enough of the quote unquote engagement. But I didn't have an engagement ring, and we didn't, you know, he didn't get on one knee, and I wasn't surprised. It was just kind of, we're grown ups, and
Mm-hmm.
this is how we've decided we want to move forward. And it's really just worked out like that. It's I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Yeah.
You know, we just my parents, that's how they got engaged.
Uh-huh.
um, they had been courting, they had been dating, and they just decided, okay, we're gonna book a justice of the peace and get married. And that's what we did as well. And we talked to my parents about it and got their blessing. And yeah, so
Oh,
it's just
that's
just a
cool.
natural progression.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I had a kind of a similar experience too because we were also in a long distance relationship. I lived in Europe, and when we decided that we want to stay together, the only way really to stay together was to get the immigration process started, to get married, even if we wanted to date a little bit longer, but that was the only way we could physically stay together. So it was kind of a same thing. There wasn't just like a prepared proposal, just let's get married so we can continue this relationship. It really doesn't define your relationship of
not at all
how it was.
We're not those kind of people. There's nothing wrong with that. But, I can't imagine how he would have done it if he was going that traditional route. I think the things that he did, the commitments that he made, were more important to me. The fact that he moved here and he left the States, and he gets along with my family really well. And I mean, he left the hot weather of Texas to cold Canada. So he's made some sacrifices that I really appreciate, and that's enough.
Yeah. You wrote in one of your emails to me that you refer to him as the import on social media. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when so we started talking in about 2013, and he expressed interest in about 2014, 2015. And I remembered him, and I was friends with him, but I wasn't interested in him. But over time, talking to him, I started to have feelings for him. And it was at my first solo trip, my first trip by myself. I went to British Columbia. I went to Vancouver and spent a day in Victoria, which is an island off the mainland. And it was the equivalent to me as backpacking in Europe. Right, it was my own trip. I, paid for it by myself. I found an Airbnb and didn't have a TV, and I hiked in the mountains and I explored all by myself. And he was supposed to join me, but something happened at the last minute and he couldn't join me. And so at the end of every day, I would call him and tell him about my day, and he'd be so excited and say, "Tell me more, tell me more." So that is when I really started to have feelings for him, but I didn't know how this was going to work as being in a long distance relationship. And at some point, I kind of made a mental note that, okay, if we couldn't be in the same city by the end of the year, I would, say, yeah, it's not going to work. It's fine. And he surprised me and booked his ticket and ended up coming in November of 2015. So the long and short of it is he came in November 2015, then back again a month later for the holiday. We went back and forth, me traveling to him, and my girlfriends, when I told them, I'm kind of in this relationship and it's with an American and he's going to move up here, one of them made a comment and said, "Wow, you imported your husband, you imported your significant other." And so we refer to him as the import. And so if we have the hashtag Leah and the import, and he, so that's the hashtag that we use. And for the 2 years or so that we dated, that's the photos that we use. And it was good because when we had to file immigration, I could say, go find this hashtag and you'll see little things about, when he came to visit or when I went to visit. And he ended up coming to Canada. When he officially moved here, he came on July 1st, 2017, which is Canada Day, which is our Independence Day. So it all kind of worked out that way. And so he's officially known as the import. And I think when his paperwork was actually approved, I found a logo that said imported, like a stamp on a box.
What?
That said, yeah. So it all worked out really well. Yeah. We don't really call him the import too much anymore because he's here and, we're married and, I changed my name and everything. But yeah, it has some good. And even like when we've gone on trips, it was, it's just a nice hashtag to use. Yes. So
it's funny because it kind of has everything in it. And, if people see it, they probably ask you why. And it's just a good story to tell.
Right.
Yeah.
And And so, family member would say, "Well, how's the import doing?" And, so it worked out really well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I know I didn't send you this question, but if you would
Uh-huh.
mind talking just briefly about how is the immigration process works in Canada, because I don't know anything about it. I know a lot
Yeah.
about it in how American immigration system works and
Yeah.
how challenging and difficult it was for
Yeah.
me. So what has been your experience? And you don't have to get too many details if you don't mind.
So you can apply from outside of Canada or inside of Canada. Um, and we did it as a common law spouse.
Mm-hmm.
So I sponsored him, and I used to have my permanent resident status in America. And I was using his address because we weren't quite sure, was I going to go down there or was he going
Mm-hmm.
to come up here? So, as far as we were concerned, we were common law and going back and forth between America and Canada. And so, when he came here in 2017, we filed the paperwork as common law sponsorship. Um, and it was the end of the year. We were kind of new in the relationship and we missed some signatures. So when it was returned to us to say, hey, you missed some signatures, we decided rather than do it again and have it be wrong, let's go to a lawyer. So we went to a lawyer and said, here's all our paperwork. We need to refile it, but we want to do it right. So she started asking us some questions and said, well, I understand that you guys say you're common law, but in the eyes of the government, they want one address and they need you living together for at least a year to consider that common law. So we
Wow.
said, okay, let's wait, and then we'll reapply. And at his 1 year mark, and then he'll have been here. So he was here in Canada for a year, a little over a year before we reapplied. But in the meantime, he had a visitor's visa,
Okay.
so he could stay, outside of America for an extended period of time. And he also was able to apply for a work visa. And so he got his work visa before his permanent resident
Residency.
application
Oh.
was approved.
Mm-hmm.
But once we had the lawyer, it's easy, but it's not. It's just intense. There's always paperwork and there's a big booklet. Um, so it was intense, but it wasn't hard, and it was just helpful to have the lawyer and let them do the
Yeah.
paperwork and let them ask the questions. And so we were like, you put the application together to prove your relationship,
Yeah.
and we had photos, and as part of our application we were able to say not only are we common law, but we're actually getting married, and here's, a contract for the venue that we've booked. And we had my friends and his friends and my mother write a letter, in support, all that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then he was approved, and so he was approved, or he had to do an interview, which is just, like a final kind of interview to make sure everything. They didn't have any real questions about the relationship. We just had to go and find things and make sure, you say who you are. So he was supposed to do that in March of this year, but we were getting ready to, or so, sorry, he was supposed to do this in April of this year, but we were getting ready to go to our wedding. So we
Oh.
rescheduled it for, I think, about a week or two later. So about 2 weeks from the date that we got married, we went to Canada Immigration and he became a legal permanent resident.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
nice because, they say, has anything changed in your application since you initially applied? And we were able to say, yeah, we got married. And
Yes.
so that was nice.
Oh, that's great. That worked
Yeah.
out perfectly. There are a little bit of differences from
Yeah.
American system. I think I just really love that he was able to work and he was able
Yeah.
to stay with you for over a year, which is, it's unusual here. You have to get married right away and then start
Yeah.
the process, and then
Yeah.
you have 90 days or
Right.
you can't work. And so,
Right.
yeah, that
He
sounds.
wasn't able to work right away, but
Mm-mm.
he
Oh,
had a
I see.
job that he was kind of working with, and we
Mm-hmm.
considered maybe having them, because they're also Canadian companies, so we thought maybe they could transfer him and they would file the paperwork. And when we realized that couldn't work out, we just decided, you know what, let's just go to a lawyer and figure out the
Mm-hmm.
details. And we love that show, 90 Day
Yeah.
Fiance. So at a certain part in our relationship, it was 90 days, and we were watching the show. So I have a
Yeah.
recording of me saying, you're my 90 Day
Yeah.
Fiance, because, we've been planning this. And so it's cute. We love that show.
Me
And
too.
it's important for both of us because we know that experience, right? We know
Yes.
having to go through all that. And so it's been a little bit tight financially, but not horrible.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend to everyone to have savings in advance, but it's doable, because
Yeah.
I think if we had waited, maybe we wouldn't have gotten married. We needed to kind of just say, okay, we're going to put things in place. Oh, and also, and I had made a note to tell you this as well, throughout the whole process, whether you're planning a wedding or not, you just have to like go with the flow and stay positive, because you're not always going to get the things that you want, right? So we filed that application at the end of 2006, 2017. We filed that application, and it came back to us 2 months later, and it was incorrect. And we were told we had 3 months to fix it, or he would have to leave. So we went to our lawyer, and she applied to have it extended. And so there are a couple of hiccups along the way that we just had to be patient about. And he felt that as an American, it should be a lot easier, because it's
Yes.
not like he's coming from a questionable country. It's just
Yes.
America. It's just next door. But it's the same process for everybody, and you just have to be patient.
Yes, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And, don't take it too personally, emotionally,
Yeah.
and say like, oh, this didn't work out. It must be a sign that we shouldn't be together.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
think it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever think that you're gonna be in a multicultural relationship, or you thought that? Have you dreamed of how your wedding is going to be? Who's gonna be your husband at the end?
I had never thought about that or put any effort into that before. I had girlfriends who got married in their 20s and their early 30s, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And I think it helped because we were older and we knew all the stuff that we didn't want to do, that we were able to focus on. So all these traditions that didn't really mean too much to either one of us, we decided to just focus on other things. And I found that Bride Chilla was really, really great. Listening to that podcast about, what things do you have to have versus what things do you not have to have. And because my parents didn't get married in the traditional way either, like my mom didn't wear a white gown, she wore a maroon jumpsuit, and all these things that were not sort of the traditional way, they were like, do whatever you want, we'll support you. And we had an opportunity to do that. And that was really great. So my wedding day is my grandmother's birthday. And she's no longer with us. And that is, we talked about which days we wanted to get married, and didn't want to get married at this time because it was a sad time because his parents had passed, and didn't want to get married at this time because it was too hot. And then we decided on April, and that worked out well. The significance of Victoria is, as I mentioned, when we started dating, when I started to have feelings for him, was that trip that he was supposed to come on. At the time, he had kept sort of pushing for the relationship, and I said, well, we'll wait till BC. We'll wait till Vancouver when we spend time together. And even though he didn't get to come on that trip, it was during that trip that I realized, okay, this is something serious. He's committed to this relationship. His parents honeymooned in Victoria when they got married. And because they're not with us, that was an added bonus. And his mother's middle name is Victoria. So all these things just kind of pointed us towards, what we're going to do. And before we decided on getting married on the West Coast, we did go on a trip just to confirm that, he'd never been to the West Coast, and confirm that we liked it. And it was nice. And we went with the things that we naturally gravitated towards. And so
I really love that, how much effort you put into these little details of finding the date, finding the location, what has meaning to your relationship, even in a deeper level. That's incredible. I didn't even think of that, to look dates and the names and everything just feels like it's lining up for you.
And there's no other, even we talked about, okay, do we really want to do this? It was like, well, what other option do we have? I didn't mind getting married at City Hall, but I worked right beside City Hall, and it didn't feel special enough. And so we just said, okay, let's just do this, and we tried to have a small guest count, but I think we had about 100 people. We could have easily gone with smaller. but hindsight is
That's a
2020.
good.
That always, yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
But it was really good. And so I mentioned there are some traditions that we didn't have. So I used websites like Bridechilla, that was my number one,
Mm-hmm.
and Wedding Wire, that was
Mm-hmm.
really helpful in finding vendors, and a practical wedding.
Okay.
Um, and we didn't really have a theme. We just did the things that we wanted and things that we didn't want. So I didn't have a bouquet because we didn't want to spend money on flowers, and instead, I told you my mom wore a jumpsuit
Yes.
to her wedding. So this is the color of her jumpsuit,
Oh,
and this fabric, this purse was my grandmother's purse, the one who
no
passed away.
way.
And so we went
She
to a
had the
cobbler.
same color?
No, it used to be. I'll send you a
Okay.
picture, but it used to
Okay.
be a different color. So
Okay.
we went to a cobbler and had them cut my mom's jumpsuit
No
and
way.
cover it with this. So the pearls
Wow.
here were
Uh-huh.
on my mom's jumpsuit in the 70s. So this
Oh,
fabric is from my mom's jumpsuit.
that's
So instead of
amazing.
so instead of having a bouquet, I held this, which is my grandmother's purse that was covered in my mother's wedding jumpsuit. And this is a handkerchief that was Thomas's mother's, and
Uh-huh.
um, his grandmother made it. And apparently, she used to make it in the church when his mother was growing up, and it was it was a stylish thing. All the women wanted one of his grandmother's handmade handkerchiefs. And so his sister gave this to me as my something blue, and I
Mm.
put it in my purse.
Into the yeah.
And so instead of a bouquet of flowers, I had this kind of bundle of sentimentality that I held, and that was so much more significant to me than holding a bundle of flowers.
Yeah.
And instead, we got married in a garden. So it was a
Uh-huh.
nice sort of English garden, and we had flowers, and it was a nice view.
Yeah.
But it was more important for me to hold on to
Oh
this.
wow.
I'll send you a link to the photo with my mom's jumpsuit and her reaction when we went to pick up the purse from the cobbler.
Oh, she didn't know. It was a
Yeah,
surprise.
she knew what I was doing, but she didn't quite understand what I was going for, and the picture of the original color of the purse as well. So
That's
it was really nice
amazing.
to do
That's
that.
very
Yeah,
cool. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing that. That's
yeah. Of
incredible.
course. Yeah,
Yeah, because, couples would sometimes try to be creative or think to just do something different than the norms. But
mhm,
it's just so hard to come up with something that feels connected to you, to your
yeah,
story and who you are.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
feel like you did a great job for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we had fun with it. So I mentioned that food was really important to us. But being out on the West Coast in BC, the Black community is much smaller than it is in Toronto. And so trying to find a good caterer or somebody who could properly recreate some of our favorite foods was a challenge. So instead of having an evening wedding, we had a morning ceremony and a brunch reception. And in honor of Thomas's Southern roots, we had food like shrimp and grits as appetizers and chicken and waffles. And because we were in Canada, we had poutine, which is fries with cheese curds and gravy poured over it. So we had
Okay.
a fun brunch, sort of a southern playful brunch, um, instead of having to worry about a dinner, catered event where maybe the food wasn't going to be
Yeah.
exactly as we wanted. And another thing we had was we didn't have an engagement party or anything like
Okay.
that, but because it was a weekend, we got married on a Saturday. Um, on the Friday, as kind of the welcome dinner, we had something known as a kwe, and it's KWE,
Okay.
and it's part of the Guyanese culture because my mother is from Guyana, and historically, and I can send you a link to that as well. It was a way for the elders to sit and celebrate the marriage with the couple and teach them the ways of being married. So historically, it has a lot more sexual connotation, but we
Mm-hmm.
didn't allow for that.
Mm-hmm.
We just My dad facilitated it. He was the elder that led the Quakeway, and we had food and we had music, and it was more as a party celebration than the wedding because we had that in the daytime. So we didn't have a DJ or dancing at the wedding. We didn't do first dance or anything like that, but instead we had the kway. And my aunt decorated the kway, and on the tables, we had about 10 tables. She had bits of history. So like as a centerpiece.
Oh,
So she had a frame that said Thomas's mother is from this place, and Thomas's dad is from this place, and Thomas's parents met here, and the significance of Victoria. So these little bits of history about him and me, to kind of tie everything together, because it's a Caribbean celebration that's happening in Canada, but he's American and I'm Canadian. And so we tried to have some more Southern foods and some Caribbean foods as well. And we found a restaurant that was able to cater. So it worked out really well.
yeah. So it feels like you had a really big focus on the food. That was like the biggest focus on. So and I really love the idea of putting some history and story about your relationship and your history on the tables, because you probably had some guests who maybe were not familiar with Thomas's relationship or yours. And so what was your guest reaction? Did they say something after the wedding, if they liked it? Or
yeah, I think it went really well. And even in things like the decor, we had a wedding planner who's based out of Victoria, and we had her include some of our favorite books and some African fabric. I'll send you, what I can do is on our website, our website was thesweetestthing.com.
Okay.
I'll send you that link, but it has an explanation of why we got married in Victoria and why that was important to us, and what his background is and what my background is, and what we were trying to do in combining the two cultures. If anything, a lot of family members said, "Oh, why so far?" Or, why, like not a lot of his American family could join us because they weren't prepared to have to get their passports and such.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I find a lot of Americans think, okay, I can just take the bus and it's over. But they have to get their passports. And I guess right now in the climate in America, it's not as easy to get your paperwork and travel as it is elsewhere. So we definitely had more of my side than his side. And I think that was part of the shift for us, right? Like, it's not what we wanted, but that was one of the things that we had to balance, because not a lot of Americans from his side could come. But it still worked out well. We had a good time. I had some of his friends give him a video surprise on the day of the wedding to say congratulations, and we sorry we couldn't be there.
Oh, that's nice.
So just these sort of pockets of sentimentality.
Yes.
I told you about food, and we had a signature drink from a distillery in Victoria.
Okay.
And we had two drinks. So we had one with champagne and gin, and the other, which was like a lemonade, a bourbon lemonade, to represent the Southern culture. My favorite part was jumping the broom. So in jumping the broom in American culture is where the slaves weren't allowed to legally get married.
Yeah.
And so instead they would jump the broom that signified going from their non-married life to their married life in this new chapter. So we jumped the broom. My mother officiated the ceremony as well.
Okay.
So we jumped the broom at the end of the ceremony. We kissed, and then we turned and we jumped the broom. And there's a great photo. I'll send that to you. And the broom that we used, I don't have it because it's wrapped up in storage, but we used what's known as a Guyanese pointer broom. And it's just like a bunch of really fine sticks that are tied together and used as a broom to sweep. But we jumped over the broom. And so I'll send you a link to it, but it's really cool because there I was, a Canadian with my American husband in Canada, jumping over the Guyanese pointer broom as part of the Southern Black American tradition. I would say that was one of my favorite parts about the ceremony. We also decided to have a private ceremony a couple of days before because it was really important for us to have my mother officiate, but she's not a pastor or a minister or a religious, so we had like a legal ceremony a couple of days before, and we had a big rental home that we had where our family was staying, and the commissioner came and did a beautiful private ceremony with just the two of us and a couple of family members, and then my mother officiated 2 days later. So we had this nice moment, and honestly I think we were wearing sweats and t-shirts. It wasn't
Nice.
fancy, but it was
Yeah.
so nice, and it was just a moment for us to be together.
Yeah.
And then come wedding day, 2 days later, we could relax a little bit more and celebrate.
Yeah.
And so we acknowledged the day that we got married on the Saturday, but it was just out of the way and not nervous. It was just, that was one of my favorite parts as well, just being able to have this moment. And it was, I think, significant of everything we had been through, kind of getting us to this moment. And it was, again, really nice vacation home, like sort of in the hills, and with lots of foliage. Nature is really important in Canada. We're big on walking around and parks and wildlife, and there's lots of that in British Columbia, which is why I like it so much. And so I think on the surface you would think, well, you know, two people, what do you have to mix? But it was all these little things. So, like I said, the food, and the family, and at the Quay, which was the ceremony, the celebration we had the day before the wedding, we acknowledged those people who couldn't be here to celebrate. So we acknowledged, Thomas's parents, and we did a libation to them, which is when you sort of pour out a little bit and, say thank you. So we had that. And even kind of the dress. Thomas wore a suit to on the wedding day, but at the Quay, we had a shirt custom made for him. So it was a black shirt, but it had celebratory kente cloth around the collar and the wrist. And so, he found a picture on Pinterest and had it taken to a seamstress, and she tailored it. And it was a way to tie in his roots of, like his family originally came from Africa, and well, not came from Africa, they were taken from Africa, right? And were slaves in Texas. And it was just a nice way for him to sort of tie in those little things. And we were able to do it in
Yes.
these little ways that wasn't like, some people have like Harry Potter themed weddings or Star Wars themed weddings. So it didn't seem campy or over the top. It's just every little thing was done with intention.
Yes. Or to wear like a complete African outfit,
Right.
it was just a little subtle little
Exactly.
addition to it. Yeah.
It was, and I wore a white dress, and I wasn't planning on wearing a white dress because my mother didn't, but I found a dress that I loved, and I did it. And so we were able to just kind of tie in all these little things. The music, we, sort of made our own playlist, and we made sure we did that.
I love that you're trying to put all of these personal and your past experiences from your mom, that you mentioned that she wasn't wearing a white dress, but even if you find a white dress that you love, you're gonna be like, you know what, this is I'm gonna just change my mind, or this is actually more me. Like, you're not so strongly trying to stick to your beliefs or something that you imagined, like, I'm not gonna have a white dress, but yes, I'm actually am, and you're fine with that. And I love that you're just going with the flow, like you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. Just let things happen and accept them in a good way. I love that.
And I think there were a couple of, I think with any wedding, there are a couple of hiccups, but nothing that ruined the day. And, it's easy to think that, okay, a multicultural wedding means that everyone's wearing different clothes, or there's like a different type of music, or it's very dramatic. That could have happened. When my best friend got married, she had an original African outfit, and her husband wore something and matching, and you see these big elaborate weddings, but we didn't want that
Mm-hmm.
anyway. So we
Mm-hmm.
were able to still have a more small, intimate wedding, um, um, and infuse these things so that it wasn't sort of in your face. And we didn't have a first dance, and we didn't have um, father daughter dances or anything like that. But we had speeches. So one of his friends sent in a speech, and somebody read that for him who couldn't be there. My brother emceed. We made the playlist together. So just by default of him being American and me being Canadian, and me having my Caribbean background and him having his Southern American background, we were able to find different ways to infuse our culture. So we're both, self described nerds, and we read a lot. And so instead of having what are the things that they give at the end of the wedding, like party
Oh,
favors,
yeah, yeah.
what we did instead is we brought some of our favorite books and
Oh,
used them as decoration, and then said to our guests, if you see a book that you like, take it.
wow, I love
Because
that.
we had doubles and we went in search. So we took James Baldwin, If Beale Street Could Talk, and James Baldwin is a American
Yes.
author, a Black American author. And we had the autobiography of Malcolm X. Um, what else? We had a couple of books that spoke to. We had Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, which is the first book we read together, um, and so we took pieces of ourselves, which represent our culture, and infuse them into the celebration in a very subtle way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's who we are. We're just,
Yes.
like, yeah. So it was
I
really
love it.
nice to be
That's
able to do that.
amazing. And
Yeah.
what I wanted to mention about, you said you had a small ceremony a couple of days before the big wedding.
Hmm.
I feel like when you did that, you kind of, you said that you felt less pressured when the big wedding came.
Hmm.
Like you had your time with your husband in a more intimate way, and then you didn't feel like you on your big wedding day that you don't have time to spend with Thomas because
Yeah.
you had more you were more relaxed to focus on your guests and more
Yeah.
on the celebration aspect of it instead of
Yeah.
the two of you getting married. And
Right.
that's a really good choice to make because then you have this balance between the two events.
Right. It was really
Yeah.
for us about sort of just keeping everyone together
Yeah.
and saying thanks for coming and having the celebration for us. So we didn't have a head table, and we didn't have a bridal party. I've been a bridesmaid before, and I've been a maid of honor before, and we didn't want to make anyone do that. We're
Mhm.
older. What we did instead was my little cousins were bubble girls instead of flower girls, and they blew bubbles down the aisle.
Mhm.
And my niece carried the broom that we jumped
Mm.
over, and my nephew carried the rings. And I don't know if you can see, but we have, and I'll send you a picture of that as
Okay.
well. But we both got our wedding bands. So I don't have an engagement ring, but our
Uh-huh.
wedding bands are matching,
Yeah.
and they're rose gold, so they match
Oh,
our
okay.
skin tones really well.
I love
Um,
that.
and mine's a bit thinner, and his is a little bit wider. So we had that, and then my best friend did a speech because I had done a speech at their weddings.
Oh, okay.
My brother emceed, so we had my father made a speech as well. But so we had these little speeches, but outside of that, we just said go enjoy the garden. And so then we were able to go and spend time with family, and Thomas was able to meet some more of my family, and we were just able to just have a nice um, morning celebration. I think it was all over by about 3 or 4 o'clock, and we let people go and explore. And that is the nature of our relationship anyway, where when his sister got married in 2017, we made a road trip to the like Texas Mexico border for her wedding, and that was an adventure. And we've gone to BC together on vacation. So everything, and the very fact that it was a long distance relationship, right?
Yeah.
So we wanted to give people time to go and explore without feeling that they had to spend the entire day at a wedding and hear all these speeches and do, it was very fluid, and it was
Mm-hmm.
very,
Like a
um,
vacation for
yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was really important and
Yeah.
very light. That's what we tried to do anyway.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And so, as far as families go, what were
Hmm.
their reaction when about having a multicultural relationship, and more importantly, you having this multicultural marriage now? What were
Hmm.
their reaction? Were they excited to have, you have an American husband now? How has that been?
It's been really good and really supportive. I have family in the States, and I'm having this with you now, but for the most part, I'm a private person. Um, so uh, the people who needed to know knew, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody was really surprised when they got the invitation. So um, the year before we got married, we spent our Canadian Thanksgiving in Montreal with my cousin, and so Thomas got to spend some sort of more. He was like a brother to me, so he's got to spend some time with my family, extended family, in Montreal, and learning about that. And my parents have been very influential in our relationship. So
Mm.
they came to Canada during the Trudeau years. And so right now, our prime minister is Justin Trudeau, but his father was our prime minister 40, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very influential in bringing in Canadian immigration, so bringing others to Canada. And so when my parents had to decide, are we going to, because although they grew up in the Caribbean, they, went to university and whatnot in England. So after they got married, they decided they were going to immigrate to Canada. And um, they were very supportive in Thomas's process in
Yeah.
immigrating to Canada, right? So it's things that I haven't experienced because I've always been here and I've always lived here. They were able to connect with Thomas about, and so whether it be little tips about, uh, wear extra layers, or it's just they've been able to identify with Thomas more on that immigration
Yeah.
experience than I've been, and just everyone's been supportive. I've had uncles who, when he first came, sat him down and said, "Well, what are your true intentions and why are you here?"
There's
He was
always
able
one
to,
person who says
yeah,
that.
yeah, and everyone's just been supportive of that. And
Yeah.
again, because we're older, there hasn't been too much doubt about our intentions. For the
Yeah.
most part, I never do anything I don't want to do, and
Yeah.
when I do something, I do it with intention. Um, so everyone has been, for the most part, really supportive of that. Um, I have a huge family, and if I had gotten married in Toronto, everyone would have had to have been there, and it would have felt too much like a show and not as intimate as I wanted it to be. So we made the decision to get married abroad, and we hurt some feelings in the process, but that's okay. And we're married, and people are getting over it. We also did premarital counseling
Mm-hmm.
in the months before getting married,
Okay.
and so I think that helped us deal with our differences. I think, as I mentioned, because the differences aren't so blatant, like there's not a language barrier, there's not, that huge of a cultural shift. Um, Little things can build up. And so it was important for us to, although we have a good relationship, to lay the foundation so that in the future, should things get, a bit weird, how do we deal with them? And so we did about 4 months of premarital counseling with a woman who was lovely. And we didn't have any religious affiliation too much with her. We did a vision board, and we were able to just talk about the things that are important to us and what we wanted to bring into this next step into our family. Thomas and I both grew up in the church, and so for me, it seems like there's always like a looming component of religion, but we're both very much ourselves first and connected to our spirituality second. And we have my parents for that, and we have his sister for that. Um, so we tried to intentionally not make it too much of a religious ceremony. And I know that in a lot of cases, Christian brides say, you know, I have to get married in the church or else it doesn't count, or my
Yeah.
mother was really upset. You know, we've gone to weddings where they had to be married in the church, and
Yeah.
we kind of grew up in the idea of God is everywhere. So we had a wedding outside in a
Yeah.
garden, and you know there were hummingbirds flying around, and it was just, it was more spiritual than anything. And I think we got that support from my parents. You know, everyone cried when they were supposed to, and it was really good.
I do agree with you. I heard that from other people too, saying that if you don't get married at church, that's where God is. And I do
Yeah.
believe that too, that God is everywhere. And
Yeah.
if you're outside and if you feel that you're in the right place, then why not?
Yeah.
And is there something that, do you remember something maybe that unexpected happened during your wedding day?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So we went to British Columbia a week before the wedding to have some quiet time beforehand and to meet with some of our vendors. And then about halfway through, family started to come as we got closer to the wedding date. We didn't want family to have to be too involved. And so, but they did, you know, people say, let me do something, so let me delegate. And that we found that we were more involved than we would have liked in the last days before the wedding. So music is also really important to us. And we would have preferred to have a better playlist, but we didn't have the time to do that because in the last couple of days, everybody needed our attention. And our recessional song was supposed to be a song that's connected to, it's by a group called Outkast, which is based out of Atlanta. And there's a horn section from one of their songs that we had on a loop. And that was supposed to be our recessional song. And it was supposed to represent the fact that, you know, we met in Atlanta and we have that connection. And it didn't get played. And it was an error by the person who was responsible for it. And if you, in our photos, you see me looking at him. I'm smiling, but I'm like, what's going on? Why isn't it playing? And if anything, I'm disappointed that we're both positive people, but like after the ceremony, you see my face not too happy. And so I'm learning to let that go because, like, what can I do about it? I'm not getting married again. And it seems small and insignificant, but it was like, it worked at the rehearsal. And I was so excited. And I was telling him, you know, about it. And, you know, for the most part, we planned the wedding together. But it was kind of my project and I connected him to things and I had meetings with him. And so at the rehearsal, when he realized what was going to happen, he was like, good job. I didn't quite know how it was going to work out, but I see what your vision is and good job. And so on the day of, when it didn't happen, you know, but I'm not going to stress out and freak out on my wedding. So I just had to let it go.
Yeah. Especially because music, it's such something that affects people's emotions.
Yeah.
So you wanted that emotion to happen.
Yeah. So that was a huge thing. And, you know, we went with it. And I decided at the last minute that instead of asking somebody to DJ the wedding, I had my iPad and I said, I'm just going to do it myself.
Nice.
And so even the decor in the reception hall, we tried to make it like we had a couch and we had a side table with books, and we tried to make it more like our living room, like we were just inviting people into our personal space. And that was really helpful as well. So there were a couple little hiccups, but nothing that ruined anything. I wrote my vows the morning of.
Oh wow!
It wasn't the plan, you know. I had everything lined up and when I was going to do it, and I had spent months taking notes and saving things for writing my vows. But I was just so busy because family was pulling me from everywhere that the morning of, my sister-in-law went to get coffee, and I got my coffee and I went to my bedroom and I sort of crouched on the floor beside the bed underneath the window, and people would call out to me and I would just ignore them because everyone was calling out to me, and I wrote my vows. But they were great. They worked out really well,
You know,
and we were
it
able.
sounds risky, but if you think about it, your emotions that you have in your heart, they really come out the day of
Yeah,
your wedding day.
yeah,
And then you
yeah,
just pour that all out. That's, it can be really good than
yeah,
writing your vows months before and you don't really have
exactly.
that wedding feel to it yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't. There may be little things that I would fix or tweak, but I don't regret how anything happened. And what I really learned with Bridechilla is that, like, I didn't want to spend my day stressed. And so I told you about, wearing a white wedding dress, which is typically not me, but I figured my hair would be more me than the dress. But my mother kept hinting that she wanted my hair to be a certain way, and my aunt brought like a clip that she wanted me to put in my hair. And at the end of the day, I just decided, fine, I'll do it the way they want me to do it. And I didn't want to be stressed on my day. So I found that through Bridechilla, I was really like, it's enough to say, it's not enough to just say, don't stress out about something. You have to really kind of like be prepared to
That is
not,
going to be that
yeah,
feeling.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I did. I just, when things didn't go the way I wanted, I breathed and I let it happen. And what we did as well is we insisted with our wedding planner that after the ceremony, before the reception, that we could get away and have some private time. And so we did that. Like, we went behind a tree, and like, even if you
Uh-huh.
have to go in a closet, we went behind a tree and touched base and how you doing and are you good? And we didn't do engagement photos because our photographer was out west and we had no chance to go out and do that with him. But engagement photos were part of his package. And so the week that how I said we went a week earlier?
Right.
So that weekend, we had our engagement photos with our photographer to kind of get to know him and get used to taking photos. And that was really helpful because that was us kind of getting in the mindset for a week from now, we're going to be taking our proper wedding photos.
Yeah.
And so they're very playful and we had fun with those.
Love
And
it. Okay, I think I asked you pretty much everything. Is
okay.
there anything else, some type of advice or recommendation that you feel like you forgot to mention that would be helpful for multicultural couples who are planning to blend their different cultures together? Something that you think that they couldn't advice that they couldn't get from anywhere else that's specifically for couples who are coming from different traditions?
Yeah, so I say be open. And one of the things I learned on one of the websites that we were planning is, you know, you can't have everything you want. So we would have regular meetings. At first, it was once a month and it was every 2 weeks, depending on what we had to do and who we had to confirm and pay. But initially, we had a meeting and kind of just brainstormed and talked about what's really important. So, flowers were important to Thomas, or being outside was important to Thomas. And I said, okay, well, if we can't be, if we can't have a lot of flowers, would you be okay with being in a garden? So when it comes to blending your cultures, I would say that you have the conversation about what things are absolute. So we had our kwekwe, and it may not be the way that somebody else had their kwekwe, but it's the kwekwe that worked for us. And it was important for us to, like, we had a DJ at the kwekwe, and it was important for us to have certain food. I think it's also important to be flexible and to have plan Bs in order, right? Like, the best laid plans mean nothing if you can't adapt. And we had to adapt, and it worked out. The song that I told you didn't get played.
Yeah.
Another song played, and it worked out. And then the song that was supposed to play played during our family photos, so we were able to relax and enjoy that. It just You have to be open. You have to be flexible. I would recommend for anybody, particularly a multicultural bride, to, as soon as you can, write down everything you remember from the day, so that you have it fresh in your mind. I used to love that show Say Yes to the Dress.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen every episode. But this season that happened in the summer, I haven't been able to watch one episode because I'm just tired of weddings and I don't want to deal with weddings anymore. So as soon as you can, write down your feelings about the wedding and recap everything that happened so that you can tell your children, so that you don't get tired of wedding talk and you can have these memories for your children or for the future or your families. And I think that's really important. And just, just to, again, like, just really important to be open and be like, share the space as much as you can. I know they say a lot of times that it's the female's wedding and the man just goes
Yeah.
along. And I don't think that was the case for me. I think maybe it leaned more towards me. But I tried to make sure that like we included things that Thomas wanted. So, there was nothing that he wasn't allowed to chime in on. And if he said he didn't want something, then we didn't have it. And like we gave him tasks. Like I could research American culture, but it's important that he sort of have a hand in it. So for the kway, we were supposed to have collard greens, and his sister had considered cooking them, but my aunt, who lives in the States but isn't from the South, instead of getting like ham hocks or smoked turkey, she just got like deli ham. And his sister was like, yeah, no, either we do it right or we don't do it at all. And so we weren't able to have that at the kway, but because we wanted to do it right.
Yeah.
And so also give yourself time. Give yourself time to get these things in order when you're planning a multicultural celebration. And I think, like, I have a friend, she's South Asian. She just got married in the summer. And I think she's Hindu and her husband's Christian. And they had planners who are used to this. So it's like just a sort of package deal. So I think sometimes when you're planning multicultural weddings, the industry is easier for some than it is for others. Because like a big Indian wedding, there sort of are more vendors who do that.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Versus a sort of an African diasporic wedding. Like we're not Nigerian or Ghanaian, so we couldn't just go to a Nigerian and say plan our wedding. We had to do the research and fit things in ourselves, which was fine. It worked out. But it's not as easy to blend the cultures if you don't always have the vendors and the support systems. So we actually, I feel like with our wedding planner, she was great, but we taught her a lot because here we are. And to be quite frank, Victoria and British Columbia is just very white. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But what they know about Black culture may be more based on what they see on social media and what they watch on television. And so we had to do some educating as well. And we had to be open to the fact that not everything is going to be the way we want it to be.
Really, my favorite part of your story was about how creative you can get into putting your personality in your wedding and also the cultures in very subtle way. So I think that couples, regardless what kind of tradition and culture they're coming from, they can learn a lot from your story about how to do it in a very subtle way, how to be in a more personal stories and put your history into it, regardless, where you're coming from. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm really, happy to be able to participate in it. I think this type of conversation isn't always out there. And so through the help of places like forums like Bridechilla, you learn about other brides or other couples and can meet them and find out, okay, well, what did you do when you were planning this? And what headed you. So I think it's very helpful to have your podcast
Yes,
and to
thank
have these
you.
conversations. Yeah.
Yes. So where can listeners find you if they want to see some, you mentioned some links, some pictures maybe they want to
Yeah.
contact you, if they can ask you more questions, if somebody
Yeah.
out there is planning a similar wedding, American Canadian.
So our wedding Instagram account is the sweetest thing, and it's SWEEDEST. Thomas's last name is Swede, so instead of the sweetest, it's the Swedest thing. And then my Instagram account is MISSLOCS. And so people are welcome to. It's not an open account, but they're welcome to add me and ask me any questions. I'm also on Wedding Wire. So yeah, whatever is fine.
Amazing. Okay, perfect.
Great. Well, thanks so much.
I will put all of these links in the show notes so they can just click to it. And thank you again for being here. That was a lot of fun.
And I'll send you some photos as well.
Yes, please do. Thank
right,
you.
Take care. You're welcome. Bye-bye.